r/relationship_advice. My FIL called me worthless, so I banned him from wedding. My FIL called me worthless, so I banned him from wedding. The fork in my hand was literally shaking as Richard leaned back in his chair, that smug smile plastered across his face like he'd just delivered the world's greatest punchline. I'm just saying, Jake could do so much better than this. He gestured vaguely in my direction while cutting his steak. I mean, what exactly does she bring to the table? A part-time job at some little nonprofit? Please. My fiancé Jake shifted uncomfortably beside me, his jaw tight, but he didn't say anything. Again. Just like he hadn't said anything when his father joked about my appearance at Easter dinner. Or when Richard questioned whether I was marriage material at Jake's birthday party. Or the dozens of other little digs and comments over the past 8 months. Dad. Jake finally mumbled, but it was weak. Half-hearted. What? I'm looking out for my son. Richard's voice dripped with fake concern. This girl works with homeless people for peanuts, lives in that tiny apartment, drives a car that's older than she is. What kind of future is that? I felt my face burning. Sarah, Jake's mom, was staring intently at her plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Jake's sister Emma looked mortified but stayed silent. I work at a domestic violence shelter, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. I help women rebuild their lives after. Right. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Very noble. But Jake's a software engineer making 6 figures. He could marry a doctor, a lawyer, someone with actual prospects. Instead, he's settling for. He paused, looking me up and down with disgust. Well, someone worthless. The word hit me like a physical blow. Worthless. The dining room went dead silent except for the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. I looked at Jake, waiting for him to explode, to defend me, to tell his father to get out of his house and never speak to me like that again. Instead, Jake just sat there, his face red, staring at his hands. Excuse me, I whispered, standing up so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. I made it to the guest bathroom before the tears came. Worthless. The word echoed in my head as I gripped the marble countertop, staring at my reflection. Is that really what they all thought of me? That I was some gold digger who wasn't good enough for their precious Jake? I loved my job. Yes, it didn't pay much, but I was making a difference. I was helping women who had nowhere else to turn. I was saving lives. But apparently, that meant nothing to Richard because it didn't come with a fancy title or a big salary. When I finally composed myself and returned to the dining room, they were all pretending like nothing had happened. Talking about the weather. Making plans for next weekend. Richard was laughing at something Emma said, playing the role of loving father and grandfather to be. But when his eyes met mine as I sat down, I saw the satisfaction there. He knew he'd gotten to me. He knew Jake hadn't stood up for me. And he was enjoying every second of it. That's when I made my decision. If Jake wouldn't protect me from his father, I'd protect myself. Even if it meant our wedding, and possibly our entire relationship, hung in the balance. The car ride home was suffocating. Jake kept the radio on some mindless pop station, probably hoping the music would fill the silence between us. But every few seconds, he'd glance over at me with this guilty, puppy dog expression that made my stomach churn. Babe, you know he didn't mean. Don't. I cut him off, staring out the passenger window at the blur of streetlights. Just don't. He's just protective of me. It's not personal. I whipped around to face him. Not personal? Jake, he called me worthless. To my face. In front of your entire family. I know. Jake's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Look, I'll talk to him tomorrow, okay? I'll tell him he crossed a line. You'll tell him he crossed a line? My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Jake, this has been going on for months. Your father has been systematically tearing me down piece by piece, and you've just sat there and let it happen. That's not fair. I've said things. Dad. In a disappointed voice doesn't count as saying something. I was full on yelling now. He humiliated me tonight, and you know what the worst part was? Watching you do absolutely nothing while the man I'm supposed to marry in 3 months let his father call his future wife worthless. Jake pulled into our apartment complex and parked, but neither of us moved to get out. The engine ticked in the sudden silence. What do you want me to do, Emma? Cut him off completely? He's my father. I want you to have my back. I want you to tell him that if he can't treat me with basic human respect, then he's not welcome in our lives. My voice cracked on the last word. Jake ran his hands through his hair, something he did when he was stressed. You don't understand how complicated this is. My parents paid for my college, they helped with a down payment on my car, they're contributing to the wedding. Oh, there it is. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This is about money. It's not about money, it's about family. He's not going anywhere, Emma. Like it or not, if you marry me, you're marrying into this family. The way he said it, like it was some kind of threat or ultimatum, made something snap inside me. You know what? Maybe I need to think about whether that's something I actually want to do. Jake's face went pale. Emma, come on. You're upset, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. I unbuckled my seatbelt and grabbed my purse. Your father thinks I'm worthless, and apparently you think his opinion matters more than our relationship. That's not what I said. It's what you showed me tonight. I opened the car door. And every other time you've chosen keeping the peace with him over standing up for the woman you claim to love. I slammed the car door and headed for our building, fishing for my keys. I could hear Jake getting out behind me, calling my name, but I didn't turn around. By the time I got to our apartment, my phone was already buzzing with texts from him. But I was done listening to excuses and half-hearted promises to handle it later. If Jake wouldn't protect our relationship, then I would. Even if it meant going to war with his entire family. I opened my laptop and started typing. The wedding venue needed to know about a change to the guest list. I stared at the laptop screen for 20 minutes before I actually started typing the email to our wedding coordinator. My hands kept hovering over the keyboard, then pulling back like I was about to touch a hot stove. Dear Michelle. Asterisk, I need to make a change to our guest list. Please remove Richard Montgomery from all wedding-related communications and seating arrangements. He will no longer be attending. Asterisk. Best regards. Emma. Simple. Clean. Final. But my finger hesitated over the send button because I knew this wasn't just about uninviting Richard. This was about drawing a line in the sand that would change everything. Once I sent this email, there would be no taking it back, no pretending it was just a moment of anger. Jake's key turned in the lock just as I hit send. Emma? His voice was careful, like he was trying not to spook a wild animal. Can we please talk about this? I closed the laptop and turned to face him. He looked exhausted, his hair still messy from running his hands through it, his tie loosened around his neck. There's nothing to talk about, I said. I made a decision. What kind of decision? The wariness in his voice told me he already suspected. Your father is no longer invited to our wedding. Jake's face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, shock, anger, panic, and finally something that looked like betrayal. You can't just uninvite my father from my wedding. Asterisk or asterisk wedding, I corrected. And yes, I can. I just did. Emma, this is insane. You're talking about my dad, not some random guest. He's supposed to be in the wedding party. He's walking my mom down the aisle since her father died. He's giving a speech at the reception. Each word felt like another weight being added to my chest, but I forced myself to stay firm. Then you should have thought about that before you let him call me worthless. Jake started pacing our small living room like a caged animal. Okay, look, I get it. I should have said more tonight. I should have shut him down harder. But banning him from our wedding? That's nuclear, Emma. That's relationship-ending stuff. With him or with me? Jake stopped pacing. What? Is banning your father relationship-ending for you and him, or for you and me? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Jake's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. Because here's the thing, Jake. I'm done being the understanding girlfriend who swallows her pride to keep your family happy. I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt when your father treats me like garbage while you sit there and let it happen. I'm done being worthless in my own relationship. You're not worthless. Then prove it. My voice was steady now, stronger than I felt. Choose me. For once, actually choose me. Jake sank onto our couch, his head in his hands. This is going to destroy my family. Your father destroyed any chance of a peaceful resolution when he decided to attack me instead of getting to know me. I've spent 8 months trying to win his approval, trying to prove I'm good enough for you. Well, I'm done trying. Either he respects me, or he doesn't get to be part of our lives. And if I can't accept that? The question I'd been dreading. The one that could end everything. Then I guess we'll find out what matters more to you, your father's approval or our future together. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle, our wedding coordinator. Asterisk, got your message. Consider it done. Is everything okay? Asterisk. No, I thought. Nothing was okay. But maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. The next morning, Jake's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. And it didn't stop. I pretended to be asleep as he stumbled out of bed, grabbing his phone and rushing into the kitchen to take what I assumed was the first of many calls from his family. Through the thin walls of our apartment, I could hear his voice, tense, defensive, pleading. Mom, just calm down. No, I didn't know she was going to. Yes, I understand you're upset. 20 minutes later, it was Emma, his sister, not me, calling and crying about how this was going to ruin everything. Then his Aunt Carol. Then his cousin Michael, who was supposed to be a groomsman. By the time I finally got up and made coffee, Jake looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His phone sat on the kitchen counter between us like a loaded weapon, buzzing with increasingly frantic text messages. 53 missed calls, he said without looking up. 53, Emma. My phone crashed twice. I poured myself coffee and didn't offer him any. I'm sure your father had nothing to do with rallying the troops. He told everyone you had some kind of breakdown. That you're being irrational and manipulative. Jake's voice was flat, exhausted. My cousin Sarah, you remember her, from the engagement party? She sent me a 3-page text about how she never trusted you and how I'm too good for someone who would tear apart a family. Something cold twisted in my stomach. I'd met Sarah exactly once. We talked for maybe 10 minutes about her job at a marketing firm. But apparently, that was enough for her to form a complete judgment about my character. So they're all taking his side. They're scared, Jake said, finally meeting my eyes. My parents have been married for 32 years. My dad has been the head of this family since my grandfather died. Nobody goes against Richard Montgomery. Nobody. Except me. Except you. He rubbed his temples like he had a migraine. Emma, my mom called me crying so hard I thought something had happened to the dog. She's convinced this means she'll never see me again, that you're going to turn me against the whole family. Are you going to let me? It was a test, and we both knew it. Jake stared at his phone as another text came through, probably another family member weighing in on what a terrible person I was. My dad wants to meet with us. Today. He says he's willing to discuss the situation. Discuss the situation? I set my coffee mug down harder than necessary. Is that what we're calling his behavior now? He says he may have been harsh last night, but that your reaction is completely disproportionate. He's willing to apologize if you'll reverse your decision about the wedding. I felt something bitter and sharp rise in my throat. He's willing to apologize? How generous of him. Emma, please. Jake's voice cracked slightly. I know this isn't the ideal solution, but maybe if we all sit down like adults. Adults? I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. Jake, your father called me worthless. Not misguided. Not wrong for you. Worthless. And now he wants to graciously apologize so he doesn't miss out on his son's wedding? What's the alternative? I lose my entire family? You keep your family. You just set boundaries with them. But apparently, that's impossible for you to imagine. My phone rang, interrupting our standoff. Unknown number. Don't answer it, Jake said quickly. It's probably one of them. But I was curious now. I wanted to know exactly how far Richard's influence reached. Emma? The voice was syrupy sweet and completely unfamiliar. This is Patricia Montgomery, Jake's aunt? I think we need to have a little chat. I hung up on Patricia before she could say another word, but my hands were shaking as I set the phone down. That was your aunt, I told Jake, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the kitchen table and disappear. What did she want? To have a little chat, apparently. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. How many people did your father call, Jake? Because it seems like your entire extended family has suddenly developed opinions about our relationship. Jake's phone buzzed again. This time he glanced at it and his face went pale. What now? I asked. It's your sister. My blood turned to ice. What? Jess is texting me. She says your mom called her asking what was wrong with you, why you were acting out before your wedding. Apparently someone contacted your parents. I grabbed his phone before he could stop me. There were 3 messages from my sister. Asterisk mom is freaking out. Someone called her saying you're having pre-wedding stress and making irrational decisions, asterisk. Asterisk she wants to know if you're okay. Are you okay? This person made it sound like you were having some kind of breakdown, asterisk. Asterisk Emma, please call me back. Mom is talking about flying out there, asterisk. He called my mother. My voice came out as barely a whisper. Your father called my mother and told her I was having a breakdown. Jake reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Emma, I'm sure he didn't mean. Stop. I was seeing red now. Stop making excuses for him. He didn't just attack me, Jake. He's now trying to isolate me from my own family, making them think I'm unstable. This is psychological warfare. My phone started ringing again. This time it was my mom. Sweetheart? Mom's voice was tight with worry the moment I answered. I just got the strangest phone call. Someone claiming to be Jake's father said you were having some kind of episode and that the wedding might be called off. I closed my eyes, feeling the room spin slightly. Mom, I'm fine. He said you were acting erratically, making demands, threatening to cut off Jake's family. Emma, that doesn't sound like you at all. Are you under too much stress? Is the wedding planning getting to you? I could feel Jake watching me, could see the guilt and panic written all over his face. But underneath that, I caught something else. Relief. Like maybe he was hoping my own mother would talk sense into me, would convince me to back down and make this whole problem disappear. The wedding planning isn't the problem, Mom. Jake's father has been verbally abusing me for months, and Jake won't stand up to him. Abusing? Emma, that's a very strong word. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. He called me worthless, Mom. To my face. At a family dinner. While Jake sat there and said nothing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke again, her voice was different. Sharper. He called you what? Worthless. Among other things. So I uninvited him from the wedding. Another pause. Then, good. Jake's eyes widened. Even I was surprised. Good? I repeated. Emma Catherine, you are worth 100 of any man who would speak to you that way. And if your fiancé can't see that, then maybe you need to reconsider this wedding entirely. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but they were relief tears this time. Thanks, Mom. Now, do you want me to fly out there? Because I will. And I'll have some words for this Richard character myself. Jake was frantically shaking his head, mouthing no, no, no. Let me call you back, Mom. I need to handle some things here first. After I hung up, Jake and I stared at each other across our kitchen. His phone was still buzzing with messages. Mine was starting up again too. This is spiraling out of control, Jake said. He was right. But I was no longer sure I wanted to control it. Maybe it was time to let everything burn down and see what was left standing. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m., and we both knew exactly who it was. Jake had been pacing our living room for the past hour, checking his phone every 30 seconds like it might spontaneously combust. When the sharp, authoritative knock followed the bell, 3 precise raps that somehow managed to sound demanding, his face went completely white. Don't answer it, I said from the couch, where I'd been pretending to read the same page of my book for 20 minutes. Emma, we can't just hide in here forever. Watch me. Another knock, more insistent this time. Then Richard's voice, muffled but unmistakably condescending even through our front door. Jacob. Open the door. We need to discuss this situation like civilized people. Jake looked at me with those pleading puppy dog eyes again. Maybe if we just hear him out. No. I closed my book with a sharp snap. The man called my mother, Jake. He went around you, around me, and tried to convince my own family that I'm mentally unstable. That's not someone you have a rational conversation with. He's not going away. You know my dad, he'll stand out there all day if he has to. As if to prove Jake's point, Richard's voice came again. I can hear you talking in there. This is ridiculous. I'm your father, Jacob. Open this door. My phone buzzed with a text from my downstairs neighbor, asterisk hey, there's some older guy in an expensive suit asking me which apartment you live in. Didn't give him any info but thought you should know, asterisk. He's been interrogating the neighbors, I told Jake, showing him the text. Jake's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might actually get angry, really angry, at his father's behavior. Instead, he walked to the door. Jake, don't. I'm not letting him harass innocent people because of our problems. He turned the deadbolt. But I'm handling this my way. Jake opened the door but didn't step aside. Richard stood in our hallway wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the August heat. Behind him, looking uncomfortable and slightly sweaty, was Jake's mom, Sarah. Finally, Richard said, pushing past Jake before he could object. We need to talk. Hi, Emma, Sarah said softly, giving me an apologetic look as she followed her husband into our small living room. She looked like she'd been crying. Richard surveyed our apartment with barely concealed disdain, taking in the second-hand furniture, the discount store art prints, the stack of wedding planning magazines on our coffee table. His expression suggested he was mentally calculating how much money Jake was wasting by living here instead of somewhere more appropriate. Sit, he commanded, like we were children called to the principal's office. This is our home, I said, staying exactly where I was on the couch. You don't give orders here. Richard's mouth tightened, but he maintained that false pleasant tone he perfected. Of course. I apologize. May we please sit down so we can resolve this misunderstanding? It's not a misunderstanding, I replied. You called me worthless. That's not something that gets lost in translation. I may have spoken more harshly than intended. You called my mother and told her I was having a breakdown. Sarah's sharp intake of breath suggested this was news to her. She turned to stare at her husband. Richard, you didn't. I was concerned about Jacob's well-being, Richard said smoothly. When someone makes rash, emotional decisions that could destroy a family, sometimes outside perspective is necessary. The casual cruelty of it, the way he made it sound like he was the reasonable one, the concerned parent just trying to help, made my vision blur with rage. Get out. My voice was deadly quiet. Emma, Jake started. No. I stood up, every muscle in my body coiled tight. Get out of my home. Now. Richard smiled. Actually smiled. Like this was exactly the reaction he'd been hoping for. You see, he said to Jake. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Unstable. Dramatic. Is this really the woman you want to? Get out. The words exploded out of me loud enough that I heard our upstairs neighbor's TV suddenly go quiet. And Jake. Jake just stood there. Again. Sarah jumped at my outburst, her hand flying to her chest, but Richard didn't even flinch. If anything, his smile widened. There it is, he said, turning to Jake like I wasn't even in the room. The real Emma. This is who you're planning to marry, son. Someone who screams at your parents in their own home. This isn't their home, I said through gritted teeth. This is my home, and you're not welcome here. Actually, Richard said, reaching into his suit jacket and pulling out a folded piece of paper, I think you'll find that's not entirely accurate. My blood turned to ice as he unfolded what looked like some kind of official document. What is that? Jake asked, stepping closer to his father. Well, since Emma here seems to have forgotten that our family has been financially supporting this little love nest, I thought it was time for a reminder. Richard's voice was sickeningly sweet. The co-signer agreement for your lease, Jacob. The one you needed because your credit wasn't quite good enough on your own when you moved in together. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Jake? Jake's face had gone from white to green. Dad, you said you'd never. I said I'd never use it unless absolutely necessary, Richard corrected. And I'd say this situation qualifies. You see, Emma, as the co-signer on this lease, I have certain rights. Including the right to terminate the agreement if I believe the living situation has become problematic. Sarah was staring at her husband in horror. Richard, what are you doing? I'm protecting our son from making the biggest mistake of his life, he said calmly. Emma, you have 48 hours to reverse your decision about the wedding and issue a formal apology to our family for your behavior. If you don't, I'll be forced to exercise my rights as co-signer. You can't kick me out of my own apartment, I whispered. Actually, I can. Jake can stay, of course. He's my son. But you? Richard shrugged. Well, that's up to you, isn't it? The room was spinning. I grabbed the back of our couch to steady myself as the full scope of what was happening hit me. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore. Richard was threatening to make me homeless unless I submitted to his demands. This is insane, Jake said, but his voice was weak. Defeated. Dad, you can't just. I can and I will. Richard folded the papers and slipped them back into his jacket. Unless, of course, Emma comes to her senses. I looked at Jake, waiting for him to explode, to tell his father he'd crossed every possible line, to choose me over this manipulation and blackmail. Instead, Jake sank into our armchair and put his head in his hands. 48 hours, Richard repeated, heading for the door. Oh, and Emma? I've also taken the liberty of contacting the venue about the complications with a guest list. Apparently, there are some rather expensive cancellation fees if we have to postpone everything. I'd hate for Jake to be responsible for that kind of debt. Sarah lingered by the door, tears in her eyes. Emma, I'm sorry. I didn't know he was going to. Come along, Sarah, Richard called from the hallway. Let them discuss their options. After they left, the apartment felt like a tomb. Jake hadn't moved from the chair, hadn't looked at me, hadn't said a word. So, I said finally, my voice eerily calm. Your father can kick me out of my own home. Silence. And you knew about the co-signer agreement. More silence. Jake. Look at me. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. I never thought he'd actually use it. He promised. He promised. I felt something fracture inside my chest. And you believed him. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Asterisk, this is what happens when you mess with the Montgomery family. Choose wisely. R asterisk. Richard had my phone number now too. I stared at the text message until the words blurred together. Richard had my phone number. He was texting me directly now, like some kind of stalker. Did you give your father my number? I asked Jake, who was still slumped in the armchair like a broken marionette. What? No, of course not. Then hell, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, but I knew it was him. Asterisk, Jacob's happiness matters more than your pride. Don't destroy his future because you can't handle honest feedback, asterisk. He's texting me, I said, showing Jake the messages. Your father is literally harassing me through text now. Jake took my phone, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. I'll tell him to stop. You'll tell him? I laughed, but it came out harsh and brittle. Jake, he just threatened to make me homeless. He's manipulating venue contracts and harassing me electronically. This isn't something you handle with a polite conversation. My phone rang in Jake's hands. My sister. I should take this, I said, grabbing it back. Emma, thank God. Jess sounded frantic. I've been getting calls all afternoon. Some woman named Patricia? And then Jake's cousin? They're all telling me you're having some kind of mental breakdown and that I need to talk sense into you. The room tilted slightly. How many people called you? 4 different family members. They all had the same story, that you're being irrational, that you're threatening to destroy Jake's family over some minor disagreement. Emma, what the hell is going on? I could see Jake watching me, probably hoping my sister would join the chorus of voices telling me to back down and apologize. It's not a minor disagreement. Jake's father has been emotionally abusing me for months, and now he's trying to isolate me from everyone I care about. Abuse? Emma, that's a strong word, I know. But Jess, he called me worthless. Then he contacted Mom trying to convince her I was unstable. Now he's threatening to kick me out of my apartment, and he's systematically calling everyone in my life to paint me as crazy. There was a long pause. Jesus, Emma. And Jake. I looked directly at him as I spoke. Jake keeps telling me to be understanding. That family is complicated. That I should just apologize so we can all move on. What do you want to do? It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a revelation. In all of this chaos, with everyone telling me what I should do, how I should feel, what I should accept, nobody had asked what I actually wanted. I want to not marry into a family that thinks psychological warfare is an appropriate response to setting boundaries. Jake's head snapped up. Emma. I held up a hand to silence him. Jess, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. If David's father called me worthless and then threatened to make you homeless unless you apologized, what would David do? He'd tell his father to go fuck himself, and then he'd probably never speak to him again. She paused. Emma, is Jake not doing that? I looked at Jake, who was staring at me with something that looked like panic. No. He's not. Then maybe the wedding isn't the problem. After I hung up, Jake and I sat in silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. My phone had been buzzing constantly, more unknown numbers, more of Richard's flying monkeys trying to wear me down with their coordinated campaign. Finally, Jake spoke. What did you mean about not marrying into this family? I meant exactly what I said. Emma, please. This is temporary. Once the wedding is over, things will calm down. Dad will back off once he realizes you're not going anywhere. Will he? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he's just getting started. And you're going to let him. Jake stood up abruptly, starting his nervous pacing again. What do you want me to do? Cut off my entire family? Lose everyone who's ever mattered to me? I want you to grow a spine, I said quietly. I want you to tell your father that threatening your fiancé is unacceptable. I want you to make it clear that if he can't treat me with basic respect, then he doesn't get to be part of our lives. And if he calls my bluff? Then it's not a bluff. It's a boundary. Jake stopped pacing and turned to look at me with something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Something that looked almost like resentment. So I'm supposed to choose between the family that raised me and the woman I love? You're supposed to choose between enabling abuse and protecting your future wife. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo message from another unknown number. A screenshot of our wedding venue's website with a big red canceled stamp across it. My hand started shaking as I realized what I was looking at. The screenshot wasn't real, it couldn't be real. Our venue contract was in my name, not Richard's. But the image was so convincing, so professionally done, that for a moment my heart stopped completely. Then I noticed the small detail that gave it away. They'd misspelled celebration in the fake cancellation notice. He's photoshopping fake cancellation notices now, I said, showing Jake my phone. Your father is literally creating fake documents to terrorize me. Jake squinted at the screen, and I watched his face change as he registered what he was seeing. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, he looked genuinely angry. That's crossing a line, he said slowly. You think? My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Which line, Jake? The verbal abuse line? The harassment line? The blackmail line? Or is fake legal documents finally enough to register on your moral compass? Before he could answer, my phone rang. Our actual wedding coordinator, Michelle. Emma, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been getting some very strange calls today. Michelle's usually cheerful voice sounded strained. Someone claiming to be the father of the groom has been calling every hour asking about cancellation policies and whether we've received official documentation about postponing your event. My blood turned to ice. He's been calling the venue. He's been calling everyone, honey. The florist, the photographer, the caterer. He told our cake decorator that there was a family emergency and that all wedding services needed to be put on hold pending further notice. Jake grabbed my arm. Put it on speaker. I switched to speakerphone just as Michelle continued. I told everyone to ignore him since all our contracts are with you directly, but Emma, he's being very persistent. And very convincing. He has details about your wedding that only someone close to the planning would know. What kind of details? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Your dress designer, the song list for the reception, even the specific flowers you chose for your bouquet. He's presenting himself as someone with authority to make changes. Jake's face had gone completely pale. How would he know all that? I felt sick as the pieces clicked into place. Your mom was at the dress fitting last month. She's seen all our planning documents. She knows every detail because I thought I was including her in something special. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Sarah had seemed genuinely happy to be involved in wedding planning. She duet and awed over fabric samples, got teary-eyed when I came out in my dress. I thought we were bonding. Instead, she'd been feeding information to her husband so he could weaponize it against me. Michelle, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, please put a password on all our vendor accounts. Don't make any changes unless you hear it directly from me or Jake, and we give you the password. Of course. Emma, is everything okay? This is pretty unusual behavior. Everything's fine, I lied. Just some family drama we're working through. After I hung up, Jake and I stared at each other across our living room like strangers. She gave him the information, I said. Your mother. The woman who cried when she saw me in my wedding dress gave your father ammunition to sabotage our wedding. Maybe she didn't know what he was planning. Stop. I held up a hand. Just stop making excuses for them. Your father is systematically trying to destroy our relationship, and your mother is helping him. Your entire family is helping him. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from his sister Emma, asterisk dad wants to know if she's come to her senses yet. This is getting embarrassing for all of us, asterisk. Even his sister, who I thought actually liked me, was treating this like I was some kind of tantrum-throwing child who needed to be brought to heel. They're all in on it, I whispered, the full scope of it finally hitting me. This isn't just your father being controlling. This is a coordinated campaign to break me down until I submit. Jake's phone rang. Richard's name on the caller ID. Don't answer it, I said. But Jake was already swiping to accept the call. Hi, Dad. I watched Jake's face as he listened to whatever poison his father was pouring into his ear. His expression shifted from exhaustion to confusion to something that looked almost like hope, which terrified me more than his panic had. Okay, Jake said finally. Yeah, I think that might work. My stomach dropped. Jake, hang up the phone. He held up a finger, asking me to wait. No, she's right here. Hold on. He looked at me with those pleading eyes again. Dad wants to propose a compromise. A compromise? I felt hysterical laughter bubbling up in my throat. Your father threatens to make me homeless and now he wants to negotiate? Hang up the phone, Jake. Just hear him out. Please. Against every instinct screaming at me to grab the phone and throw it out the window, I found myself nodding. Jake put the call on speaker. Richard's voice filled our living room, smooth and reasonable, like he was mediating a business deal instead of trying to salvage his campaign of psychological warfare. Emma, I owe you an apology. The words were so unexpected that I actually blinked in surprise. Jake was watching me hopefully, like maybe this was the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. I've had some time to reflect on last night's dinner, and I realized my comments were inappropriate. I was concerned about Jacob's future, but I expressed that concern in a hurtful way. It sounded practiced. Rehearsed. Like he'd been reading from a script written by someone who actually understood human emotions. However, Richard continued, and there was the trap I'd been waiting for. I think we can all agree that the current situation isn't sustainable. The family is upset, vendors are confused, and frankly, this level of conflict right before a wedding suggests deeper compatibility issues that should be addressed. What kind of compromise? Jake asked, and I wanted to shake him for even entertaining this. Family counseling. With a professional. 3 sessions before the wedding, Emma and I, Jacob and I, and all 3 of us together. If we can work through our communication issues in a neutral setting, then Emma can feel confident about reinstating my invitation. Jake turned to me with something that looked like relief. That actually sounds reasonable. And if the counseling doesn't work? I asked, though I already knew this was a trap. Then we postpone the wedding until we can find a solution that works for everyone. No hard feelings, no pressure. Just a recognition that marriage is about joining families, not dividing them. There it was. The real ultimatum. Submit to counseling where Richard would undoubtedly play the reasonable, concerned father while I'd be painted as the unstable, difficult fiancé. And if I didn't perform well enough in his theatrical production, he'd have the perfect justification for destroying our wedding entirely. The therapist would be someone neutral? I asked. Of course. I'll let you choose from a list of 3 qualified professionals. A list he'd undoubtedly pre-screened to find therapists who shared his worldview about family hierarchy and women knowing their place. Jake was nodding eagerly. Emma, this could really work. It shows Dad is willing to put in effort, and it gives us a safe space to work through everything. And the apartment situation? I asked. Put on hold indefinitely, assuming you're participating in good faith in the counseling process. Of course. Another carrot and stick. Behave in therapy or become homeless. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom, asterisk sweetheart, I've been thinking about our conversation. Do you need me to come out there? Your father and I can be on a plane tonight, asterisk. The image of my parents, my dad with his union worker sensibilities and my mom with her fierce protective instincts, sitting across from Richard in some therapist's office was almost enough to make me laugh. I need time to think about it, I said. Of course. But Emma, I hope you'll consider that this is an olive branch. A chance for us to start fresh. After Jake hung up, he looked at me with cautious optimism. It's something, right? He's actually willing to go to therapy. Jake, do you really not see what this is? His face fell. What do you mean? He's not offering therapy. He's offering a performance. 3 sessions where he gets to play the reasonable victim while I'm expected to grovel and prove I'm worthy of joining his family. You don't know that. Don't I? I stood up, pacing to our kitchen window where I could see Richard's Mercedes still parked on our street. Still watching. Still waiting. Your father just spent the day harassing me, threatening me, and terrorizing our wedding vendors. Now suddenly he wants to hold hands and sing Kumbaya in couples therapy? You really think that's genuine remorse? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if it is? What if this is his way of trying to fix things? Then he can start by calling off his flying monkeys, deleting my phone number, and issuing a public apology to every vendor and family member he contacted today. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, asterisk therapy is a good idea. You clearly need professional help, asterisk. I showed Jake the text. Your father's idea of an olive branch. Jake stared at the message, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of real anger cross his face. Then his phone rang again. His mother this time. Please, Sarah's voice was thick with tears the moment he answered. Please just try the counseling. I can't lose my son over this. And just like that, I watched Jake's resolve crumble completely. I stared at Jake as his mother's sobs echoed through our apartment via speakerphone. Sarah was laying it on thick, talking about how she'd barely slept, how this was tearing the family apart, how she just wanted everyone to get along for the wedding. Mom, please don't cry, Jake said, his voice cracking slightly. We're going to figure this out. I just don't understand why it has to be so complicated, Sarah sniffled. Your father is trying to make amends. He's willing to go to therapy, for heaven's sake. Richard has never agreed to therapy for anything in his life. I felt my jaw clench. Of course she was framing this as Richard making some huge sacrifice instead of acknowledging that he'd spent the day psychologically torturing me. The counselor your father mentioned, I said, speaking directly into Jake's phone. What's their name? There was a pause. Well, I'm not sure of the exact details. Because your husband said I could choose from a list of 3 professionals. I'd like that list now. Another pause, longer this time. I think Richard is still researching options. Of course he was. Because there was no list. There was just whatever therapist Richard had already selected to rubber stamp his behavior and put me in my place. Sarah, I said, my voice dangerously calm, your husband called my mother and told her I was having a mental breakdown. He's been harassing our wedding vendors all day. He threatened to make me homeless. And now you're calling here crying because he's graciously offered to attend therapy? Do you hear how insane that sounds? Emma, I know Richard can be difficult. But he's trying. He's manipulating. There's a difference. Jake shot me a warning look, but I was done protecting everyone else's feelings while they trampled on mine. I didn't know about the vendors, Sarah said quietly. I didn't know he'd called your mother. But you knew he had all the wedding details. You gave him that information. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Sarah? Jake prompted. I thought he just wanted to feel included. He seemed hurt that he wasn't more involved in the planning. Her voice was barely a whisper now. I didn't think he'd use it to weaponize it against your future daughter-in-law? Emma, please, Jake said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. My phone buzzed with another text. This time it was from a number I recognized. Emma, Jake's sister. Asterisk dad says you're willing to do counseling. That's great. Maybe now we can all move past this drama. Asterisk. I showed Jake the message. Your father is already telling people I agreed to therapy. Before I actually agreed. Jake's face went pale. He probably just meant. He meant to back me into a corner. Again. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter. I'm going for a walk. Emma, wait. No. I need air. And I need to think without your entire family manipulating every conversation. I was halfway to the door when Jake's phone rang again. Richard's name flashing on the screen like a warning signal. Don't answer it, I said. But Jake was already reaching for the phone, that familiar look of resignation on his face. The look of a man who'd been trained his entire life to jump when his father called. Hi, Dad, he answered, and I knew I was about to watch him get pulled back into Richard's web of control and guilt. I walked out, slamming the door hard enough that our neighbor's dog started barking. Outside, Richard's Mercedes was still parked across the street. When he saw me emerge from our building, he rolled down his window. Emma, he called out, his voice carrying that same false pleasantness. I hope you're considering our discussion. I looked at him sitting there in his expensive car, waiting like a predator outside our home, and something inside me finally snapped. Instead of responding, I pulled out my phone and started recording a video. This is Jake's father, I said clearly, pointing the camera at his car. Parked outside our apartment building, stalking and harassing me after threatening to make me homeless. Richard's window went up so fast I was surprised it didn't shatter. But I kept recording as his car pulled away, because I had a feeling I was going to need evidence of exactly who Richard Montgomery really was. I uploaded the video to a private cloud folder and texted the link to my sister, my mom, and my best friend from college. Not to post anywhere, yet, but because I was starting to realize I needed people who could verify what was happening to me. Richard was too good at making me look like the crazy one. When I got back to the apartment 20 minutes later, Jake was sitting on our couch with his laptop open, looking like he'd aged another 5 years. I've been looking at therapists, he said without looking up. Dad sent over that list he mentioned. How efficient of him. I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, as far from Jake as possible. Let me guess, they all specialize in helping difficult women adjust to family expectations? Jake's mouth twitched slightly. One of them has a blog post titled When Setting Boundaries Becomes Selfishness. Even he could see how ridiculous this was. That had to be something. And the other two? Dr. Patricia Crenshaw, she wrote a book called Honoring Your Husband's Family Legacy. And Dr. Michael Torres, who apparently does a lot of work with premarital adjustment issues and has a 90% success rate in preserving family unity. I stared at him. Jake, do you hear yourself right now? Your father literally handpicked 3 therapists who are professionally committed to putting me in my place. I know it looks bad. It doesn't look bad. It is bad. This isn't therapy, it's an ambush with a professional witness. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. Asterisk Jacob mentioned you're reviewing the counselor options. Dr. Crenshaw has an opening Thursday. Shall I book it? Asterisk. Your father is texting me again, I said, showing Jake the message. He's already trying to choose which of his pre-screened therapists we'll see. Jake rubbed his temples. Emma, I'm trying here. I really am. But I don't know what else to do. If we don't try therapy, he's going to follow through on his threats. The apartment, the wedding, all of it. So we're negotiating with terrorists now? He's not a terrorist, he's my father. Your father threatened to make me homeless unless I submit to psychological evaluation by professionals he selected. That's not parental concern, Jake. That's coercion. My phone rang. My mom. Sweetheart, I watched your video. Mom's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. That man was stalking you. Jake's head snapped up. What video? I put Mom on speaker. I recorded Richard sitting outside our apartment building, harassing me. Emma sent it to us about an hour ago, Mom continued. Your father and I have been discussing the situation, and we think you need to come home. Now. Mom. No arguments. That man is escalating, and Jake's family is helping him do it. Pack a bag and get on a plane. Tonight. Jake was staring at the phone like it had personally betrayed him. Mrs. Chen, I think you might be overreacting. Am I? Mom's voice could have cut steel. Because from where I'm sitting, my daughter is being stalked, threatened, and manipulated by a man who thinks his money gives him the right to terrorize her. And her fiancé is asking her to submit to counseling with that man's handpicked professionals. It's just family drama, Jake said weakly. Family drama is arguing over seating charts. This is abuse. The word hung in the air between us like a bomb. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but Mom wasn't finished. Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your father looked up this Richard Montgomery online. Did you know he's been involved in 3 different lawsuits over workplace harassment in the past 10 years? My blood went cold. What? 2 former female employees and 1 male subordinate. All settled out of court with NDAs, but the records are still accessible. This is what he does, Emma. This is his pattern. Jake's face had gone completely white. That can't be right. I can email you the court documents, Mom said calmly. Richard Montgomery, Montgomery Development Solutions, Seattle. Multiple harassment claims, all involving systematic intimidation and retaliation against people who didn't submit to his authority. I felt like the room was spinning. He's done this before. To other people. And he'll keep doing it until someone stops him, Mom said. The question is, are you going to let him do it to you? The court documents arrived in my email 47 minutes later. I stared at the PDF files on my laptop screen, my hands shaking as I scrolled through page after page of legal language that painted a horrifying picture of who Richard Montgomery really was. Systematic campaign of intimidation. Threatened termination and blacklisting. Created hostile work environment through coordinated harassment. Used financial leverage to coerce compliance. The patterns were all there. The same tactics he was using on me, he'd used on employees who dared to challenge him. Young women who'd reported his inappropriate behavior. A male manager who'd questioned his business practices. All of them had been ground down by the same methodical psychological warfare I was experiencing now. Jake. My voice came out as barely a whisper. You need to read this. He was still sitting on the couch, staring at his phone where his father had been texting him increasingly demanding messages about the therapy appointment. When he looked up at me, I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. I don't want to, he said quietly. What? I don't want to read it. He set his phone down like it was radioactive. Because if I read it, then I'll know. And if I know, then I'll have to do something about it. The honesty of it hit me like a slap. At least he was finally admitting what I'd suspected all along, that part of him already knew exactly who his father was. Jake, he settled 3 harassment lawsuits. 3. That means there were probably dozens more that never made it to court. I turned my laptop toward him, but he wouldn't look. This isn't about family loyalty anymore. This is about you protecting an abuser. He's still my father. And I'm supposed to be your wife. The words exploded out of me. In 3 weeks, I'm supposed to promise to build a life with you. But you can't even read documented evidence of your father's pattern of abuse because it might require you to actually stand up to him? My phone buzzed with another text from Richard. Jacob isn't responding to my messages. I trust you haven't filled his head with more dramatic nonsense. Dr. Crenshaw is expecting us Thursday at 2 p.m. He's still texting me, I said, showing Jake the message. Your father is still harassing me right now, while we're sitting here discussing his history of harassing other people. Jake finally looked at my laptop screen. I watched his face change as he read the first few lines of the legal documents. His skin went gray, his mouth tightened, and his hands clenched into fists. This can't be him, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Settlement amount, $185,000, I read aloud. Plaintiff alleges defendant Montgomery created a hostile work environment by systematically undermining her credibility, making inappropriate comments about her appearance and capabilities, and threatening her employment when she refused to submit to his advances. Jake flinched like I'd hit him. Settlement amount, $92,000. Plaintiff alleges defendant Montgomery retaliated against him for reporting safety violations by initiating a campaign of harassment including monitoring his personal communications and threatening his professional references. Stop, Jake whispered. Settlement amount, $240,000. Plaintiff alleges. Stop. Jake slammed the laptop shut. I can't deal with this right now. He stood up abruptly and started toward our bedroom, but I grabbed his arm. You don't get to walk away from this, Jake. Not this time. What do you want me to do? He spun around to face me, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, he looked genuinely angry. Cut him off? Destroy my entire family? Blow up my life because some lawyers made some accusations? Those aren't accusations. Those are settlements. Your father paid nearly $500,000 to make these victims disappear. The word victim seemed to hit Jake like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of stress and panic. I need air, he said, grabbing his keys from the kitchen counter. I need to drive somewhere and think. If you leave now, don't bother coming back. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them, and I watched Jake freeze with his hand on the doorknob like I'd just fired a warning shot. What did you say? His voice was dangerously quiet. You heard me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I couldn't back down now. If you walk out that door instead of dealing with this, then we're done. The wedding is off, the engagement is over, everything. Jake turned around slowly, and the look on his face was nothing I'd ever seen before. Not the familiar panic or guilt or desperation. This was something colder. Harder. So now you're giving me ultimatums too? The question hung in the air between us like poison. I realized with horrible clarity that he was comparing me to his father, like setting a boundary about him abandoning me in a crisis was the same as Richard's psychological warfare. That's not an ultimatum, Jake. That's me telling you that I won't be with someone who runs away when things get difficult. Difficult? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Emma, you just showed me legal documents proving my father is a serial abuser. That my entire childhood, everything I thought I knew about my family, was built on lies. And you think taking 5 minutes to process that is running away? Part of me wanted to soften, to tell him he could have all the time he needed. But I'd been softening and compromising for months while his family systematically destroyed my sense of reality. 3 people, Jake. 3 people tried to stand up to your father and he crushed them. And right now, I'm number 4. So no, you don't get to go for a drive and hope this all blows over by the time you come back. My phone started ringing. Sarah's number. Don't answer it, Jake said sharply. Why? Because you're afraid of what she's going to say? But I answered it anyway, putting it on speaker before Jake could stop me. Emma, sweetheart. Sarah's voice was syrupy with fake concern. Richard told me about the therapy appointment Thursday. I think it's wonderful that you're both committed to working this out. I looked directly at Jake as I responded. Actually, Sarah, I haven't agreed to anything. In fact, I've been reading some very interesting court documents about your husband's history with people who don't submit to his demands. The silence on the other end was deafening. I don't know what you're referring to, Sarah said finally, but her voice had changed. Gone tight and defensive. 3 harassment lawsuits. Nearly $500,000 in settlement payments. Did you know about that when you were helping him gather information about our wedding vendors? Emma, I think you're confused. Am I? Because the pattern described in these legal filings sounds awfully familiar. Systematic intimidation. Using financial leverage for coercion. Coordinated campaigns to isolate and undermine anyone who challenges him. Jake was staring at me with a mixture of horror and something that might have been admiration. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Richard has never been found guilty of anything, Sarah said, her voice getting sharper. Those were nuisance lawsuits from disgruntled employees trying to get money. 3 of them, Sarah. 3 separate people who all described identical behavior patterns. What are the odds? You're being manipulated by lawyers and gossip. I'm being manipulated by your husband. The difference is I finally have proof. Sarah hung up without another word. Jake and I stared at each other across our living room. His keys were still in his hand, the door still behind him, escape still possible. But something in his posture had shifted. She knew, he said quietly. My mother knew about the lawsuits. Of course she did. Jake, this whole family has been covering for your father for years. And they expected me to become part of that cover-up. His phone buzzed with a text. Then another. Then it started ringing insistently. The Montgomery family machine was kicking into high gear, and we both knew exactly what that meant. Jake's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text after text, call after call, the Montgomery family network lighting up like Christmas as word spread that I'd mentioned the lawsuits. Turn it off, I said. Jake looked at his phone like it was a snake, then powered it down completely. In the sudden silence, I could hear our upstairs neighbors walking around, the hum of our refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat. Emma, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. For what, specifically? He set his keys on the counter and walked back to me, his movement slow and deliberate like he was approaching a wounded animal. For all of it. For not protecting you. For making excuses. For being so terrified of losing my family that I was willing to let them destroy the woman I love. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I wasn't ready to forgive him yet. And for not seeing what my father really was until you forced me to look. He sat down heavily on our couch, his head in his hands. God, Emma, those court documents, how many people has he hurt? How many people tried to tell me over the years and I just dismissed it as family drama? My laptop chimed with a new email. My mom, sweetheart, your father found 2 more lawsuits from his company in Portland. Sending those documents now. Are you safe, ? There are more, I said quietly, showing Jake the email. He looked at the screen and something cracked in his expression. Not panic this time, but something deeper. Something that looked like grief. I can't marry into this family either, he said. What? Jake looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. You said you couldn't marry into a family that thinks psychological warfare is appropriate. Well, I can't marry into it either. Because it's my family, Emma. I helped create this. Every time I stayed quiet, every time I made excuses, every time I chose keeping the peace over doing what was right. I made this possible. My phone started ringing. Richard's number. Without hesitation, Jake reached over and answered it, putting it on speaker. Dad. Jacob, what the hell is going on? Your mother is hysterical, she's saying Emma has been making wild accusations. Are they wild, Dad? Because I'm looking at legal settlements totaling nearly $500,000. The silence on the other end stretched for so long I wondered if Richard had hung up. I don't know what lies you've been fed, Richard said finally, his voice taking on that familiar condescending tone, but I think you need to remember who raised you. Who paid for your education? Who taught me that love is conditional on obedience, Jake interrupted, and I felt my heart stop. Who showed me that protecting the family image matters more than protecting actual family members? Jacob, you're being ridiculous. Emma and I are postponing the wedding. I stared at him. We'd never discussed postponing anything. You're postponing it so you can come to your senses, Richard said with obvious relief. No, Dad. We're postponing it so I can figure out how to cut you out of our lives completely without destroying Mom and Emma in the process. This time the silence was absolute. You don't mean that, Richard said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. I mean every word. You're not welcome at our wedding. You're not welcome in our home. And if I find out you contacted Emma, our vendors, or anyone else in our lives again, I'll make sure those court documents go viral on every social media platform I can find. You ungrateful. Jake hung up on his father mid-sentence. Then he turned to me, took both my hands in his, and said the words I'd been waiting 8 months to hear. Emma Chan, will you marry me? Just us, no family drama, no strings attached. Will you marry someone who finally learned how to choose you first? I kissed him instead of answering, tasting tears on both our faces. We eloped 3 days later in the mountains, with just my parents and my sister as witnesses. Richard Montgomery was nowhere to be found.